Welcome back. I'm Roy with Rugged Badger Racing and Team Parts Badger. Behind me is our 80 hours to Gingerman ChampCar. We have 18 hours remaining of this project, and today we are going to take this motor, which we just prepped, and it is ready to go, and we're going to put it in the car and hopefully do the first start. Let's get started. Now is a good time to knock on wood. Getting this put in place, nothing major as far as issues as of yet, but I do know that I'm gonna have some lines to connect. So I'm gonna have some oil lines in the back here, which these are already pretty difficult to get to. I'm also going to have the starter at a minimum. There's also another oil pressure sender back there. And then maybe I'll even connect this alternator too. So I'm gonna spend a little bit of time and then do that before I lower the engine any further. All right, first snag. The starter solenoid connection. Here it's expecting a ring terminal. I have this connector, which I already started to disassemble. So rather than swap out starters, I think I'm gonna cut this and add a ring terminal. Hopefully, let's see here. Yeah, hopefully if I need to go back, I can leave enough of a pigtail that I can always go back to this connector. All right, real quick tech tip. I have a problem with these hex fittings right here. And my problem is they're a 12 millimeter and I have a 10 millimeter hex as my biggest socket. So what I actually did, I took a 12 millimeter bolt with some washers and added a nut. I popped it right in here and then I just tightened the nut. And that worked great. First time I've ever tried anything like that. Frankly, I was just trying to avoid a trip to Harbor Freight again to buy more tools. So I'm really happy that this worked out. So if you're ever in a pinch and you need something, this trick worked out really well. Now on my oil lines, the lines came with this fitting right here, which this then can rotate freely, and it's directly connected to the line 90 degree into the remote oil filter thing that's installed. I didn't like these because I really couldn't get these out easily, so I switched over to that new style, but what that means is I have to move over to a straight fitting. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go ahead and remove this one. I have a second one right here I gotta remove. I bought a spare AN adapter kit off of Amazon. It was fairly inexpensive. These are the fittings that I'm gonna replace on this line here, and then that way I can hook up the oil, continue dropping that motor down. All right, running into a bit of an issue here, and I think it's a pretty big issue. So if you will take a look, get the camera down in here, I have a clearance issue on this oil pan. And the clearance issue is occurring because of this NB steering rack. And if you remember, the pans that came off the car, I mentioned, hey, this one's got a big dent in it. Well, that big dent is from this steering rack. I don't think these pans are designed for this steering rack, and we largely use the dimensions from the Ecotec Miata pan that had come off of the car. So we're gonna run into the same problem. Now, ours isn't sheet metal, so we can't just bend it, it's machined. So I think our only option is moving back to the NA steering rack, which I have one here, and you can see this doesn't have these big bosses. Now on the NB steering rack, this side has a giant boss that comes up about this high. That's what we're running into, and we're gonna run into it on the top side as well because our top plate is a little bit bigger. We have more material there. So the main issue though is I cannot put an NA steering rack on an NB subframe, and that's what this is. I don't know why they have an NB subframe in the car and an NB steering rack, but that thing's gotta go. I really don't have any other options, which sucks because we just got done putting the A-arms together. We cotter pinned everything. So I'm gonna take apart as little as possible. I'm gonna leave the motor largely where it is. I'm gonna raise it up a little bit to get some clearance around the steering so I can pop the steering shaft. I'm gonna have to cut my nice wire ties and everything there, but this is at least a couple extra hours worth of work, which is really frustrating. I was making really good progress on this thing, but without further ado, I might as well get to work. Clock's ticking. All right, so the subframe is out of the car. It's a much easier process. It's just 4 bolts on each side to drop that thing. I wasn't too worried about these calipers because the calipers and lines are gonna go. Those are just hanging for now. Now, I was hoping to swap in the Parts Badger subframe, but this thing is beat to hell. And I also want to apologize for complaining about how dirty this car was, because that subframe was awful as well. And that was on the Parts Badger car. So in looking over this subframe, we got a lot of suspect areas. You can kind of see some pretty significant damage here. Most importantly is an area where the bushing mates in the cup here. And I don't know if you can catch that groove on camera. See that semicircle? That's wore down maybe 10 thou, 15 thousandths. And that matters a lot because we don't have that much clearance between the additional sleeve length and the bushing. What that means is the sleeve pushes in a little bit further, and then the bushing makes contact here, and that creates friction. And we certainly don't want that. So I'm gonna run over to the shop. I'm gonna grab another subframe. Before I do that, I'll probably pull these A-arms off of this to get ready to transfer to the new subframe. We just cotter pin this, but it should be pretty easy to detach the steering rack element. Steering rack came out great. I didn't have any issues with that at all, at least for the coupler that goes to the steering rack itself. So I'm gonna get to work. I'm gonna pull these arms, run to the shop, take a look at the subframes. Hopefully we have more than one, and hopefully we have a 1997, because that has all of these little bells and whistles that allow us to put an extra brace on the bottom. It also has some extra reinforcement, but if it's an early one, I'm gonna take what I can get at this point. All right, new subframe is here. So it's really dirty, but it looks in good condition. So I'm gonna get that cleaned up. Something else to note. So this was overnight. The engine dropped about 12 inches. And I should have known that that was gonna happen, because last time I had an engine up overnight, actually taking the Ecotec motor out, it did drop a little bit. Luckily I checked everything over. There's no problems there, but I gotta remember to put jack stands under that thing. Nonetheless, let's get cleaning. Subframe looks in really good condition. Went through everything, and let me try to get a good view of this surface here. It's a nice smooth surface where that bushing hits, where that other one was really wore down. But this is in pretty good shape. I'm just gonna take a light to it real quick and just look over all the welds now that it's clean. And then I have to clean hardware, so I never clean the subframe hardware. I have that here, and then I'm just gonna clean the connection points where that subframe hits, and then that's going up in the car. One thing to note, I did buy a bunch of brake clean, and normally I get the stuff that's very clearly non-chlorinated. Usually the generic stuff is as well. But when I sprayed this, and unfortunately I have like 10 bottles, this stuff just smelled awful. And my guess is this is probably chlorinated. It actually says that it's banned in the state of California. Yeah, not for sale in California. Where this one doesn't say that. So my guess is that one's chlorinated, so I'm gonna return all those. You really don't wanna be running the chlorinated stuff. It's bad enough when you're running the green stuff that you get this, just that smell. But I'm sure that chlorinated stuff, that's even worse. And I wanna die on my own terms, not because of brake clean. Anyway, I'm gonna get things cleaned up, and I will get the subframe in. that was a lot harder than it needed to be. But the steering rack is in. Now, I don't have my safety wire. My safety wire is at the shop, and I am not going back to get it. That is going to be a tight squeeze, but hopefully I can safety wire these. But they do have lock washers. They do have Loctite Red. I'm happy this thing's finally installed, so let's finish putting the motor in. Two little issues, one big one. So the two little issues on each side of the car, and I think this is why the chassis on those ears was shaved down. It's the oil filter housing and then the coolant housing are rubbing against that. It looks like those features where it's rubbing, I can literally just chop those off. I think I'm gonna do that on the next motor for the spare, but nonetheless, those are fine. I think the engine's gonna work even with that clearance issue. It's just really close, just makes it hard to get into position. A much bigger issue is rack clearance. So what's interesting, we do have a little bit more material in this particular space on our oil pan versus the Ecotec Swap pan, and I think that's causing some of the issues here. So now I do have a couple options. In looking at this, there is extra material on the pan. In later designs, we are going to be able to shave that area down to avoid that clearance issue. On this one in particular, I looked at the design. I don't feel comfortable really grinding that much material, especially in here, and then if I pierce the oil pan, I'm in trouble. I could either grind the steering rack, or I could add in spacers in the mount itself. And I'll show you the gap that I'm looking at. That's on this side. The other side's all the way down. I think I could end up splitting the difference. The other side's actually a little too low. So I could probably split the difference and then make some sort of spacer to go in here. I could measure this. Maybe it's like 3/16 on both sides, maybe upwards of a 1/4 inch. I don't think a 1/4 inch is really gonna affect a whole lot, but I think I'll do a combination. What I might do is grind down the steering rack a little bit, and I'll show you I have another steering rack that's seen better days, but it's the same style rack. And this is the area where I'm having some issues. I'll pull this bushing off. So first off, the bushing material, up here on the sides, this does nothing. So I can cut that no problem and get down to this casting, but I bet you I could shave 3/16 off this casting without any issues at all. Now, there's also a strap that goes over this, and the strap is probably gonna have to get ground down a little bit too, but the strap is a strap. I know it likes that reinforcement here, but if it's strapped down, that isn't gonna go anywhere. So I think I might be able to get away with that. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna pull the motor up, I'm gonna grind a little bit and just see how much clearance I have, and then if I need to, I'm gonna make little spacers for these mounts in the meantime, because we are running out of time and I gotta get this thing running today. So better get to work. All right, I believe I'm done. So the oil pan is right on the steering rack here. Now, it is a pretty short area. The good news is we'll be able to get a measurement, and then we'll be able to modify this for oil pans in the future. I also didn't need to trim this inner ear off, or outer ear. I needed to just trim the inner, but I was having some fitment issues getting the engine down. Nonetheless, I'm not really concerned about the steering rack going anywhere, because the oil pan is definitely going to prevent that. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Probably not a great thing. But nonetheless, I'm happy it's in and I can start moving forward. So what I need to do next, I got some cleanup to do. So I'll get the vacuum in there. I will torque down the motor mount bolts and then start connecting the rest of the engine, drive shaft, power plant frame, fill with fluids, and then we can start this thing. So a little bit of a problem. I have a new gasket from 1320 Performance for this particular header. Unfortunately, you can see the gasket doesn't fit. Regardless of what orientation, I can flip it, I can rotate it all directions. So there's 1, 2, 3 times 2. So there's 6 different ways this can go, and none of them fit. So my guess is I have maybe an earlier version of this particular header. So I got to email the company to find out. So what I think I'm going to do, I'm just going to use really small hardware for now, have something between there to sandwich, and then just plan on replacing that shortly. Hopefully I can get a new gasket. That was the most difficult power plant frame I've done in my entire life. Probably worse than when I was a kid. My first Miata, geez, 20 years ago? 21 years ago? Using hand tools on the side of a road to replace a differential. This is right up there. Lots of stuff protruding into the tunnel area, but more importantly is the motor is so stiff. And I think that's not only these mounts are really stiff and there's not a lot of movement, but that pan is definitely tight against that steering rack, and there is no movement at all. Having trouble getting that thing aligned. What I think I'm gonna have to do, I don't think I wanna put much load under this engine like this. I think I'm gonna have to put some risers in the mounts, get this engine raised up, but at least for now I can get the thing started, confirm everything. I don't see any damage or anything like that. There's likely just tension. Now I got a lot of bolts, and that's a big hunk of aluminum. I mean, frankly, I think it's stronger than the block. So I really am not concerned immediately, but in a race condition, that's gonna get interesting. So next up, I'm gonna seal the radiator. I have to add that weather stripping because I don't wanna have to do that again later. And then, let's see, I need to torque, now that I have the drivetrain attached, I do need to torque the front crank pulley. That is a torque to yield. So I think I have to torque it to like 76 foot-pounds plus 100 degrees. But that's gonna be a lot of torque, and I wanted the drivetrain attached. So hopefully I can figure something out there to lock those brakes in place while I'm working on that, get that tightened. But once I do that, I really think figure out oil, figure out coolant, and then I'm ready to go. So I have some breaker bars attached to the nuts on the rear hubs. Get these seated here. Looks like they're making contact. Motor's still spinning. There we go. Awesome, I can't believe this is working. So at least get it to 74 pounds to start. There we go, all right, that's 74 pounds right there. Then I need to go 125 degrees. So let me make a mark. I'm afraid this way this thing is moving here. I try to put a mark over here. Maybe that's top dead center. I'll put it at 90. Put it at 90. 90 plus 35 degrees. So if I go at 45 degrees roughly, a little bit less than 45, it's going to be about here. So need to have that pulley mark go to there. And I'm gonna do this because this thing is gooey. 125 degrees, you know, I wonder if I could take that with the impact. Wonder if I'm breaking those hub nuts loose. Yeah, you know what? I'm probably breaking the nuts loose because there's a torque multiplier. I need to get that stretch. I'm gonna move over to the impact. There we go. That was much easier. Let's inspect my hubs, see if I F those up. So the transmission, I don't know what gear it's in, but unless it's in fourth gear, it's more than a 1-to-1. The transmission's 4-to-1. Let's say I was doing 100 foot-pounds, that's 400 foot-pounds on the rear of the car here. Let's see. Okay, those didn't move. Those are pinged in place. So I didn't mess up that one, that's good. Should have thought about that before I did this. Let's take a look. Yeah, look at this one. This one moved, and it moved a lot. All right, yeah, that got real tight. See, it still spins, so it didn't seize the bearing, but I'm gonna have to move that back. Glad I checked that. All right, so Yeah, there's no way around it, because even if I put it in like 5th gear, which is technically like an overdrive, I'm still at over 300 foot-pounds on the rear of the car, because the diff, I think, in this one's a 4.3 diff. So, all right, I'll use the impact in the future. I know I don't want to use that necessarily on critical stuff like this, but nonetheless, that's tight.